turned it on. I guess I turned it back off. Well, a newspaper columnist once observed that our world is made up of all kinds of people. He notes, for instance, that there are dog people and there are cat people. There are morning people and there are night people. There are swimming pool people and there are beach people. There are ice-capade people and then there are hockey fans. There are check the luggage and then there are carry-on people. There are golfers and then there are real athletes. There are people with immaculate cars and then there are people with kids. All kinds of different people. A kaleidoscopic variety of interests, values, and idiosyncrasies. So many unique, colorful, different kinds of people. Older and younger, female and male, single and married. But all of us people are strangely familiar with one kind of interest. You know what it is? Self-interest. Self-interest is one thing that sort of unites us as a human race. In fact, we have been called the most self-centered generation in all of human history. I kind of resent that, but unfortunately, there's a lot of truth to it. The me generation we've been called, and you and I, as members of this me-first society, have probably more affected by this me-first mindset than we think we are. In fact, I would bet that self-centeredness has a greater grip on our thoughts, our choices, our values, and our relationships than we could even imagine. Sometimes almost to the point where we subconsciously judge virtually every activity, every opportunity, every decision on the basis of what's in this for me. Now, the reason many of us have come to think that way is the result of years and years of cultural conditioning. From childhood, we're led to believe unless you have the newest, greatest toy, you'll never be happy. And then unless you have the right clothes, no one at school is going to like you. And then unless you get into the right college and go into a prestigious career field where you'll make lots of money, where you can drive nice cars and live in a new home and take great vacations. If you have all of that and do all of that, what will the result be? Happiness. That's what we're promised. We'll finally experience true and lasting happiness. But does it work? Does the me-first mindset really bring lasting happiness? Well, I'll let you come to your own conclusion. Krista's already voiced hers. As on that is as how we go along today, all right? Well, I'm glad you're here as we kick off a new series, 4 weeks, entitled Breaking Bad. Now, a moment ago, Larry gave us a brief overview of the television and then Netflix series of Breaking Bad. And while none of us are likely to become criminal meth manufacturers, we all do find ourselves tempted to make decisions that can really backfire on us and even hurt innocent bystanders, often family members. We're not so much going to talk about specific choices or sins, but rather 4 different life philosophies that sound good, sound logical, sound very desirable, but that in the long run will usually leave us disappointed, sometimes devastated, far from God, and really unprepared to face the next life. Now, you know, these days people are not rejecting Jesus Christ because they're converting to Islam, Buddhism, or Hinduism. Can you guess what percentage of Americans are Muslim? Just 1.4%. How about Eastern religions like Buddhism, Hinduism? 2%. Judaism, 2.7%. Mormon, 3.2%. But you know what people are defecting from Christianity for? Well, the largest, fastest growing religious category in America today is what they call nuns. Not Catholic nuns, but nuns as in N-O-N-E-S. They're called that because when asked, what religion do you follow or adhere to, their answer is none. And this category of no religion people has doubled in the last 15 years. In a recent American Religious Identification Survey, it was discovered that there are more nuns than ever before. Over 40% of Americans say they have no affiliation with any religion whatsoever. Co-researcher Barry Cosman says these people aren't thinking about religion and then rejecting it. They're simply not thinking about religion at all. 40% of people in our country today say they had no childhood religious initiation ceremonies such as baptism, christening, or a bar mitzvah. 55% of those people who marry today do not have a religious-based ceremony, and 66% of Americans say they do not expect to have a religious funeral. Now, some of this philosophy comes from relativism, which we're going to talk about next week. Some of it is hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure, which we're going to talk about on September 24th. But a lot of it stems from individualism, which we're talking about today. Now, you all remember the game hide and seek that we play as kids. And you remember how there was always that one kid who would hide so good nobody could find him. And we had a kid like that in our neighborhood, and after a while the rest of us would just give up and just, and just leave the guy to rot out there. And of course, sooner or later he would show up all mad because we hadn't kept looking for him. And we'd be mad all back trying to say, look, the game isn't like, hide and never be found. There's hide and seek, and you're supposed to be found, And he said, it's not hide, give up. So no matter what, though, the next time he would hide to get again. He's probably still hiding somewhere, a skeleton in some closet somewhere. Recently, I heard about a man who found out he had terminal cancer. And he was a doctor, and he knew all about dying. And he decided he didn't want to make his friends or family members suffer through that with him. And so he kept his secret. And then suddenly, to the people around him, he suddenly died. And some people said how brave he was facing that all alone. But privately, his family and friends were very hurt that he didn't need them, that he didn't trust them, that he didn't say goodbye to them. He hid too well. And that's kind of hide and seek grown-up style. There's a tendency that many of us have to hide the real us, to never let anyone get too close, to be independent, to not let anyone to know what's really going on in our lives. And a lot of people kind of do that with God. They keep him at arm's length. They're going to call their own shots. They're going to set their own agendas. They're going to captain their own ships. And that whole approach to doing life is what we call individualism. Now I want to take a moment to differentiate between individualism and individuality. Now I read this week about a guy named Dick Fosbury. Some of you are familiar with him, how he revolutionized the high jump back in the 60s. Up until that time, high jumpers would either scissor over the bar one leg at a time, or they would do what they call a curl, face down, body facing the ground. And then came along this moppy-haired college student who ran up to the high jump bar, then turned sideways and jumped over backwards. People said, what's wrong with that guy? He's some kind of nut. Well, they stopped criticizing him when in the 1968 Mexico City Olympic Games, he set a world record of 7 feet 4 1/4 to win the gold medal. Dick Fosbury was different. He was unconventional. He was a nonconformist, but in a good way. Today, virtually every high jumper in the world uses the Fosbury flop, as it's come to be called. Dick Fosbury may have been a maverick, willing to be unique. He was a nonconformist, but that had to do with his individuality, not necessarily a me-first philosophy behind individualism. Now I want to take a look at a few pictures and tell me what you see. Like, is this hair a symbol of individualism or him expressing his individuality? And are these guys any less self-centered because of the way they dress? What about this couple? Does their appearance say, hey, it's all about me, everybody look at me? Or do they just prefer to dress different than most other people do? Are these people crazy, self-consumed egomaniacs? Or were they just kind of having fun with their wedding the way this couple was? If a guy does this in the end zone, maybe he's considered a hot dog. But if this guy does a celebration flip, maybe that's looked at as okay. Remember this famous photograph? Is this a me-centered guy who just craves a spotlight? Or is this a man maverick enough, nonconformist enough to stand alone for what he believes in? So being your own little God who rules and reigns over your own little kingdom called self is one thing, and to be unique and original and a nonconformist is something completely different. Well, to examine this issue of individualism, we're going to consider a couple of parables that Jesus told in Luke chapter 15, the story of the lost sheep, and the story of the prodigal son. Now, during the time in which Jesus lived, a herd of sheep and their shepherd would have been a very common sight. Sheep were a vital part of the Jewish culture of that day. They were used in the offerings in the temple, but they also provided one of their primary forms of meat, and their wool was used to make clothing. Jesus talks about a man who had 100 sheep, and as sheep tend to do, one of them went astray. You might say he was Breaking Bad. That was a bad joke right there. That was a bad joke. Also in Luke chapter 15, Jesus, one of his most famous parables is the one about a strong-willed teenager who rebels against his father and runs away from home. And both stories pretty much capture what Isaiah 53 verse 6 is describing: sheep and people who insist on going their own way, which is what you might call the excitement phase of individualism. And we all know what I'm talking about. You know the feelings of power and independence that come when you are out on your own and you just get to do whatever you want to do. It's the feeling a kid has when his parents are away, and so he cranks up the stereo to window glass rattling levels, because, hey, he can do it. There's nobody to tell him he can't. It's a 16-year-old doing unthinkable things with his dad's Ford Taurus. But, he's got his driver's license now. He's out on his own. He can peel donuts. He can spin out, he can go 90 miles an hour because he now is in control. It's the college freshmen totally on their own, making their own hours, making their own decisions. It's the person away on a business trip taking full advantage of the fact that they're someplace where no one knows them or that they're married. The sheep is no longer stuck having to conform to the flock. He's now his own boss. He can go where he wants to go. He can do what he wants to do. And the rebellious son, well, he's out from the authority of that overprotective dad now. He's headed for the big city with the bright lights, with the bars and women of the streets. He has no curfew, no restraints. He can finally get out and live life his way. And that can be an exhilarating feeling, can it? Which, of course, is the allure of individualism. You're in charge. You make your own rules. You answer to nobody. And we choose the path of individualism because it looks so liberating, so inviting, so sophisticated. But you know something? That path bites you eventually. It doesn't advertise that it's gonna, but it does. The sheep's little independent joyride turned out to put him right on the edge of a cliff. He wound up alone and terrified. The wayward son found himself penniless, friendless, and famished. The bright lights of the big city began to dim a little bit. He had said, "Get out of my way. I'm in control of my life." But it kind of backfired. Wasn't supposed to turn out bad. Not with him in charge. Both the sheep and the son went from going your own way, which is the excitement phase of individualism, to suffering the consequences, which is the reality sets in phase of individualism. And I would guess that virtually every one of us in this place would admit to times when we puffed out our chest and in a self-willed way said, "I'm going to do what I want to do. And not God or anybody else is going to tell me otherwise." And ultimately it backfired. And we suffered the consequences of individualism. For instance, I wonder how many of us right now are paying relational consequences. How many of us have ruined a marriage or lost friends or alienated our children because of our insistence on always doing things our own way? Think about it. How does a me-first person treat their spouse? What effect do self-absorbed parents have on their children, or self-absorbed adult children have on their aging parents? How does an I'm the center of the universe person tend to treat their coworkers? And it comes back to haunt you. We pay sooner or later. I wonder how many of us are paying emotional consequences for "I'll live my life as I want to live it" attitude. I wonder how many of the hurts, how many of the regrets that we experience actually, in retrospect, turn out to be self-inflicted. What about the financial consequences of living me first? Maybe we're feeling the weight of terrible debt. And we have to ask ourselves, does self-first living have anything to do with that? How about spiritual consequences? How many of us might wind up separated from God forever because of a stubborn, independent streak inside of us? Individualism promises the excitement of doing what you want to do, calling your own shots, but down the road usually lies a lot of pain and a lot of disappointment. It's like the man who said, it took me 3 marriages, a bankruptcy, and a bout with alcohol to figure out I was on the wrong path. You know, that inviting road promises so much freedom, so much happiness, so many thrills. And he got hammered. And you know what follows the crash? Well, decision time. What's the individualist going to do now? Well, believe it or not, some individualists are so hardcore, they will hurriedly, dress their wounds as quickly as they can. Then they'll roll up their sleeves, formulate a brand new, fully independent plan of action, and they'll head down that road again. And yeah, they'll probably crash again and again and again. And they might be dreadful crashes, self-destructive crashes. But that's the pattern of the individualist. And some individualists will pay any price to maintain their status of master of my own destiny. Now, thankfully, some individualists will do a sort of cost assessment during the suffering, the consequences, reality sets in phase. And when decision time comes, they do what the prodigal son did. They begin to reconsider. In Luke chapter 15, verse 17, Jesus says that the once independent son finally came to his senses. He woke up, he looked around himself and realized what a mess he had made of his life. And in doing so, he entered the third phase, the lessons learned phase of individualism, which led to his returning home, his father throwing a huge party to celebrating his son's homecoming. And how about the wayward sheep? In Jesus' story, what do you think the odds are that the sheep is going to survive on his own, all by himself out there on that mountainside? Or that he's going to somehow find his way back to the flock? Not good. Because sheep are not real bright animals. Now, have you ever noticed that animals with a very high IQ eventually get their own television series or movie deals? It's true. Think about it. Dolphins, very intelligent. Remember the name of that dolphin who had his own TV show? Flipper. There are dogs, very smart, like Lassie, Rin Tin Tin, and others. They're very smart, so they get television, movie deals. Cats, Garfield, the Pink Panther, Sylvester, all smart. Horses are smart. Black Beauty, Talking Horse, Mr. Ed. Even pigs are really smart, like Babe. And of course, remember on Green Acres, the pig named Arnold Ziffel, whose tail could actually forecast the weather? He was kind of a Rain Man, idiot savant pig, very, very bright. But sheep, you can't really come up with a name of a sheep who's really smart. And other lamb chops, but that was actually somebody's hand in there. It wasn't actual sheep, okay? So that doesn't really count. Sheep are not very intelligent. And I don't think it's any accident that we human beings are often compared to sheep in the Bible. However, the sheep in Luke chapter 15 at least has something going for him. He knows he's lost. He knows he's in trouble. The sheep does not say to the shepherd when the shepherd finally finds him, "No, hey, I'm fine. I'm not in any danger on the edge of this cliff. Other sheep are far worse off than me. Maybe later when I get older, then I maybe want to be rescued, but not now. I'm fine." No, the sheep is not in denial. The sheep is lost and knows he needs to be found. And you notice the shepherd does not come up to the sheep and say, "You stupid sheep, you only have yourself to blame. What were you thinking wandering off like that? I ought to just leave you out here and see how you like being really independent." The shepherd doesn't say any of those things. The shepherd just opens his arm, he gathers up the sheep, puts him over his shoulders, and goes home and throws a party. No lectures, no chewing out. Just the shepherd so filled with compassion toward his sheep, who probably would have created his own demise, that he took him in his arms. And far from resenting the pain involved in the search, the sheep matters so much to the shepherd that he brings him home. There's 99 others, but he said, "This one meant so much to me." He throws a big party to celebrate its homecoming. Now, of course, Jesus in these parables, we all understand, is not talking simply about straying sheep and wandering wayward sons. He's talking about you and me, and about how in some way or another, all of us, like sheep, have gone astray. Like the rebellious teenagers, we've tuned God out. And what often is behind That is individualism. It's that desire to do what we want to do and live like we want to live. And wouldn't you agree that there seems to be these three general stages of individualism? First, there's the going your own way, which is very exciting, exhilarating. Then there's the suffering the consequences. Reality sets in phase. And finally, hopefully, there's the decision to come home, the lessons learned phase of individualism. Now, earlier I talked about hide and seek, which is a really simple game. One person seeks, and everyone else runs off and hides. The fun part is to be one of the hiders. If you hide, you're in control. You get to make your own decisions, where you're going to go. You're in charge. The hard job in hide and seek is to be the one who seeks, because the seeker has to deliberately let all of the hiders run away from him and place himself in the position of being the one who searches on and on for the people who are trying to avoid you and who are laughing at your inability to find them. Nobody wants that job, because if you take it, everyone is going to run from you. Now, in the game of hide and seek, the one who seeks does not even have much of a title. You know, in other games, sometimes there's an exulting sounding title. Like in basketball, there's the center. You're the center of attention. In football, there's a quarterback. Very impressive sounding. In soccer or hockey, there's the goalie. But in hide and seek, it's not so much that way. What do we call the one who seeks? It. Not Captain It, not Grandmaster It, not even Cousin It. For some of you Addams Family fans, just plain old It. And nobody wants to be it. In fact, at the start of the game, what does everybody say? Not it. There is no itness about me. The one thing I am is I am not it. That's what I am. I'm not it. And at the end of the game, when people have hidden themselves too well, if they elude it throughout the entire game, it has to cup its hands, and it yells out in a voice that penetrates the entire neighborhood, "Ollie, Ollie, and free." Have you ever wondered where that phrase comes from? It's actually a Latin phrase that means liberate Ollie. No, actually, I don't know what it means. I just made that up. I don't know. But in the context of the game, it means you can come home now. It's safe to come out. No one will chase you. No one will tag you. You won't have to be it. You're free to come home. And it's the cry of grace for people who are hiding, that the game is over and you're free. Now you can come home. And that's pretty much what Jesus is saying in Luke chapter 15 about how people play the game of life. We all want to hide. We all have a need to be sought. And we're all a little confused about what it means to be found. You know, around here we sometimes talk about seekers, meaning people who are sort of maybe on a spiritual journey. They feel like there's something missing in their life. Maybe they're looking for God or something. But you know, another side to seeking is God is seeking us. When everyone says, not it, and we all run off and hide, God says to all of humankind, okay, I'll be it. It's as old as the human race. After Adam and Eve first sinned, what did they do? They tried to hide themselves from God. Have you ever tried to hide from God? Or hide something from God? Maybe there was something in your life that you knew should not be in your life, and you were ashamed of that. Maybe you felt like you had failed God in some way. Maybe you were afraid that what would happen to you if you really opened up your life to God, and so you just kind of hid. The truth is, we've all done it. All we like sheep have gone astray, the Bible says, like rebellious teenagers. We've all defiantly done what we wanted to do. But I got to ask us today, all of us, how is that individualism working out for us? Is it all it was cracked up to be? Have there been some consequences? Like the prodigal son, maybe there's some of us who are ready to come to our senses. You know, ready to get off that dead-end path of individualism and to come home. Or to all of us here who tend to want to hide, who need to be sought and are kind of confused about what it means to be found, God says, Ollie, Ollie, in free. Come out wherever you are. No one's hiding. No need to hide. It's time to be found. It's time for all of you who have been hiding too good for too long to just come home. And when you come home to God, Jesus says in Luke chapter 15, verse 7, all of heaven breaks out in a joyful celebration. Well, that's individualism. And the next few weeks we're going to talk about relativism and hedonism and other things. And I hope, if possible, you'll be here for all 4 weeks. Why don't we stand? We'll have our closing prayer. Lord, today we are grateful to be reminded that you're always looking, you're always searching, you're always pursuing us, because you see that we make sometimes really poor choices, and we confuse individuality with individualism, or we just have that gravitational pull toward self, me, myself, what I want, and ultimately it is a dead-end path. So God, we thank you for the wisdom of the Scripture, and it challenges us today to realize that even when we stray, whether we're young, whether we're older, we all have that tendency to go out on our own and kind of leave you out of the picture. That God, we would see that we do need you, and we need your guidance and your protection and your provision, and we need your love and forgiveness in our lives. And God, we thank you that when you pursue us and we finally allow ourselves to be found, that you're like that loving shepherd. You're not chastising and punishing, but rather you are loving and forgiving. And you give us a second and third and fourth chance. And God, we all need that. I pray, God, that we would learn the difference between, having a healthy self-esteem and being self-absorbed. And that we would center our lives around you rather than center them around ourselves. And we know that in the long run, it's a better path. So God, we thank you for the chance to be here today and to stop from the busy pace of our lives, to reflect on things that really matter. And I pray that we will each take what we've learned today and apply it to our lives